And we are back once again with another episode. I call them episodes, I call them sessions, I call them a little bit of everything. But another episode of NX Office Hours, where we talk about all things NX and answer questions that people have, and keep it light and informal. So you can see my name there. Let's see if I get it right that time. Oh, there we go. Brandon T. Roberts on Twitter. And Philip, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Philip. I've been with Narwhal since about January, that's wild that it's almost been 6 months now that I've been around. It seems like it was just yesterday, but there's a lot of things about 2020 that felt like January was just yesterday. It also feels like it was about 20 years ago. So, so it's like that. It feels both very far away and not very far away at all. But I'm here happy to join Brandon and get some NX questions answered.
Yep. Yeah, that's the same for me. It'll be a year for me this month, and I
Wow,
looked at it and I
congratulations.
was like, yeah, thanks. And you look back and I was like, man, it's been a year already. It's like I said, it feels like yesterday, but
Hmm.
yeah, coming up on a year already, which is like I said, when you're like having fun and doing work, it time flies by. So that's pretty good.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's see. We got some people here in the chat room. This is pretty cool. I'll say if you have any questions while we're doing office hours, just feel free to ask them there. And if we'll try to answer them here, and if we can't, then we'll get some answers and have them for another time. So with that being said, we had some few questions that have been asked before that I'll start with. And one of them, because we get this question, I think more pretty recently as we've talked about things like NX Cloud and incremental
Hmm.
builds and things like that. And that is, how do I publish an existing library I have inside my monorepo? Um, so today, if you have an Angular or NX workspace that has Angular projects in it, or and you've generated libraries there, and you like all those libraries are like specifically internal to that monorepo. They don't have any. If we talk about like things in the Angular JSON, like build targets and those different tasks that you can run against a particular project, you'll notice when you generate libraries within NX, you don't have a build target, so you can't necessarily build that particular thing.
Hmm.
Um, and we've had some discussions about like buildable versus like publishable libraries,
Yeah.
at least within NX. So, but I would say that at a minimum, to take an existing library that you have inside an NX monorepo, you would need you would need a few files, and I'll share my screen. I'll try to share my screen here in a second to see, so we can show what the difference is
Hmm.
uh, of what a buildable library versus a library that just exists within your monorepo looks like. Because I think I have generated a couple of those, two
Yeah,
different
this
ones. So,
this is great, and I'll say out to the audience that like I'm about to learn something because I have not had to do this with NX. There is a lot to NX, and not everybody knows everything about it. So, I'll be sitting here just like asking questions, just like someone in the audience who has no idea what you're talking about, and it'll be
oh,
great.
that's great. Thanks. uh, so yeah, let's see if I can share my screen. Yes, share screen. Which one are we looking here? Okay, so I have and this is one I've created here, just a sample repo of a sample repo that has a few libraries in it. I believe I used this one last time,
Hmm.
actually. And you can see here I've created your lib, which I'll go back to and start from the Angular JSON first. And here, so we have I guess we can show the difference. But with an app, you have different architect. You have architect, and the architect has different targets. So a build target will produce like those artifacts you
Right.
need for producing a distributable version of the application, like compiled and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go down to one of the libraries that we've generated in this workspace, this one is your lib. You can see library. We have the same architect target, but we don't have any. We don't have a build target here, so we can't build. We couldn't build and publish this library out
Mm-hmm.
on npm
Mm-hmm.
that way. So and we can. I guess we also see we have other libraries here that are also non-buildable, non-publishable libraries. So I'll generate. I will go through and generate one and kind of show you the difference of the actual files that you'll need, or the things that you'll need to generate a new library.
Mm-hmm.
Right, lib should be an Angular workspace. Just check. Yep. Generate lib. This one npm lib. The publishable flag to make a new library. Publishable. It's style sheet. So this library here, I always forget what the key command is here. I think it's Command K. Maybe not. Or is it? There it is, Command J, for hiding that terminal there.
Okay.
Shout out to my friend Luke who showed me that. But as you can see, the npm library for this, or this library that I just generated, this publishable has a build target and also has some additional files here. So if we go back to our lib and look in the library folder, or excuse me, we look at the top level folder, we have tsconfig, tsconfig lib, and tsconfig spec, and those JSON files. And we have also, like I said, also have a build target. So in our publishable library, we have a few extra files. We have an ngpackage.json because our buildable library uses, or our builder for these libraries uses ngpackager underneath for building that into like a distributable thing using the Angular package format. And we have packages for this for React and I think just regular Node apps also, but we use ngpackager here. We also have a package.json that you can, this is distributed with your library, where you can include any peer dependencies that you might have, or dependencies that that library depends on. And this is will also be what the name of your npm library will be published under, assuming you own that scope of that npm scope. And so the tsconfig and these other files will pretty much remain the same. And what you get in an addition, as an addition, is this tsconfig.lib.prod.json. And this one for Angular libraries, you have to set enable, at least today, you have to set enable Ivy to false. And that way it doesn't, you're not publishing a library to npm that's been compiled against Ivy because the Angular team just not ready yet to have libraries compiled against Ivy yet. So you're still building against the old compiler.
Okay.
So those are at least the minimum things you would need to convert this library from a non-publishable library to one that you can build and publish. So I could essentially take these, I guess I didn't want to open both of those. Take these 3 files here and go into my other library and paste them there. And of course, I'd have to tweak where I want these libraries to, like the distribution or the disk directory, and what I want that library to be. And this one will remain the same. So those, at a minimum, like those are the files that you need to update. The other thing you would need is the build target You can copy build target from there and our lib and change npm lib to our lib. So that gives us a build target. Make sure we're pointing at the right files. Gives us a production config. And if I bring up my terminal here, I did everything right. Let me make sure. Check my files one more time. Package. Okay. So index build our lib. So now that we have a buildable target there. And let's see, our lib source index. Okay, I don't have an ng module in here, that's okay. I would just copy this one. And so it'll get rid of that error. Let's try it one more time. And so now that library, we've taken a library that was in our workspace, added a couple of files and a configuration. And now we can see under dist libs, now we have our lib that we can ship as a publishable library. So it doesn't take much effort to do this. Of course, if you have a lot of libraries that you want to publish to a different source, then you can do that. But this is, like I said, the manual way of making a library that's not publishable. The good part about this is that we are working on a schematic that will do this for you. So that's so
we had a question about that in the chat. So
awesome. Let's see. What did it say? They wanted to a schematic. Yep, a schematic to convert a library to be published would be nice. Yes, that's actually one of the things that we have in the works. That's actually going to do those steps for you. Create those files that you would need as if you started from that point and create your build target. So you at least have something that you can reuse across projects as opposed to like copying and pasting files around.
So if I wanted to, so this is talking about like converting an existing library to be publishable. Can I also create like a brand new publishable lib and sort of like selectively expose my non-published libs through that?
No, you cannot. Publishable libraries have to depend on other publishable libraries. Those are the constraints that we have today.
Okay. Yeah. So along with this, so is that a constraint that we enforce automatically, or is that something that you need to do with like your tags and like TS-lint constraints?
That is a constraint that we enforce automatically. If you actually try to ship a publishable library on something in your monorepo that is not publishable, then it will error. It will throw an error there when it tries to build the package. And I think that's and the reason is more for complexity. Like, how do you make sure that you're shipping the correct thing, as far as those libraries that are internal to you. Don't accidentally ship some code that you didn't want to.
Sure.
And then, of course, it decreases the complexity of having to figure out how to map the output of one library to another, for at least far as distributing it. So.
Okay. Cool. So whenever you're ready to actually publish a library, you need to be ready for that library to only depend on other published libraries. Does that come with like a certain amount of like refactoring usually, or?
No, you can. The good part about it is once you make a library publishable and it has a build target, and then if you go and then make the other ones have build targets, then your workflow as far as building or serving an application remains the same. When you actually build the libraries, then we change the configuration underneath to map to the distributed or the built version of that library instead of the internal one. So.
Awesome. Well, this is great. I should start using this.
Yeah.
I'm always happy to learn something else about this product that our company makes. And you know, you see this all over. You know, everybody sort of has their area of expertise within the NX tool chain. So especially for folks out there who feel like, you know, I don't know enough about NX, or, you know, I don't know everything that there is. You know, that's why we have these office hours. Number one is so that you can come to us and ask questions. But you know, even folks who work on it don't know every sort of corner. Everybody has their specialty within the tool set.
Yeah, definitely. I'm still, like I said, I'm still learning also. So these are some of the things that I've at least dug into, or they impact me in some kind of way, because like as far as like NGRX, we were looking at using NX for building our things. So we had to, you know, see what things we could take advantage of in order to do that. So we don't have a ton of libraries, but we have enough cross-cutting libraries to need that kind of thing. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Go ahead.
So we do have some questions coming in on the chat. Do we want to go through the questions that we already had in our doc first and then go over to chat questions, or how you want to do this?
We can go over the ones in the chat.
All right. So the first question that I see here in the chat is from Devin. I have a question about NX Cloud. You don't want to commit those access keys to a public repo, right? Wouldn't that allow anyone to use your credits? There we go.
Yeah, so bring the question up there and commit those access keys. Right. And those, yes, that is good practice to not commit your keys, you know, unless you don't care about them and they're throwaways or something. But in general, you don't want to commit your access keys to a public repo so people can use your credits. And if I'm not mistaken, NX Cloud allows you to set an environment variable for your cloud token so that you don't have to embed that token into your configuration itself, especially if your project is open source. So that is another way you can, you know, still use NX Cloud and keep your access token secure.
Yeah. So you might have to do a little bit of setup with you know, your CI or individual developers to make sure that they get access to that key, but you want to make sure that that's stored somewhere in a secure way. So that folks who need access to it can get to it, and then it's provided at the right times to the CI.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's see, what do we have next? This one says, I need to create a feature that will be separated from mobile and desktop. Should I generate 2 libraries or one lib with 2 modules as they are shared components via inheritance? You want to take this one?
Yeah. So I think that's interesting, because Brandon and I were talking about this like right before, of, you know, what would we talk about if we ran out of like questions. And so one of the things we wanted to talk about was organizing libraries, because, you know, with NX, what we provide for you is a set of tools for sort of managing those libraries. But figuring out how to actually organize your code is kind of up to you. We don't have a crystal ball to be able to tell like everybody, you know, here's the exact way that you should organize your code every single time. It's foolproof, and you'll never run into any edge cases that prove us wrong, right? Like we have a lot of smart people, but we're not wizards. So in terms of this, the way that I would probably go about this is, you know, you will probably end up with, I would put this into 2 different feature libraries, one that was for desktop and one that was for mobile. And some of that is to be able to separate your builds. You know, you don't want to have to rebuild your mobile application if the changes are only impacting your desktop application. So if you actually separate those out into different libraries, the dependency graph can actually detect the changes to one library that don't impact another one. so that we're, when you're developing and when you're running your CI, we're really big about only rebuilding code and only retesting code that has changed. So the more you separate them out into libraries, the more the dependency graph can do that good work for you and make sure that you're not, wasting developer time, waiting for things to build and test. And then also, not wasting like your CPU cycles. CPU cycles on, like distributed CI are cheap, but they're not free. And eventually that's going to add up if you're rebuilding the same stuff over and over again for no reason. So that would be the reason that I would separate those into libraries, because the dependency graph of NX can detect changes at the library level like that. But correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we can do that at like an Angular module level. It's got to be at the library level.
Yeah, today it's at the library level. And of course, it detects looks at which files have changed and then maps that to the libraries that those are contained. But not at the library level. That'd be pretty. You'd have to get pretty granular with your with your module to have that level of scoping.
And I think that would get like pretty like framework specific. Angular handles things through modules, and it depends on what 3 or 4 different definitions of module you're actually talking about. But yeah, so separating things out by libraries would definitely be the way to go. That would probably mean that you would have another shared library that had those components that you might share between desktop and mobile. And it's actually the next comment that's like right under this says, it seems that I end up with lots and lots of libs. And you do. Like, straight up, I won't lie about that. The first time that I kind of came in, especially as I came into Narwhal, I had been using NX at my previous job before I came into Narwhal. That was, I was such a big fan. It's like getting to join, your fave. Like I got called up to the big leagues, right? So, I had been using NX, and I was like, we got a lot of libs. Like we've got quite a few libs here. We've got multiple apps, like we're living large. And then I came into Narwhal and started working on some of our clients. And, I had no idea the number of libraries that certain clients have.
And multiply it by like 10. And
I have been thinking like, why are folks so worried about like build times? We got like 100 libraries and things aren't that bad. That's medium size, maybe. So, and I think that's something you kind of have to get used to, that you are going to have a lot of libs, and you're going to have to put work into figuring out how your organization wants to organize those things and how they're going to separate concerns, and then making sure that you use the NX tools to their fullest to be able to manage that for you. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about things like making sure that you have good, useful tags on all your libraries. In this case, that's probably a case where you would have some sort of tag that would indicate the platform that was usable for the library, and then be able to make sure that, desktop libs can only depend on desktop libs, and mobile libs can only depend on mobile libs. If they're shared, they have to be marked that way with a tag so that you can make sure that everything sort of lines up.
The tags are definitely something that I want to, as far as like organizing tags, how do you take more advantage of those? That's probably definitely something I need to learn more about. Like I've used them, but like slicing and dicing things correctly is to enforce those boundaries is something I could get better at.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you, it's getting a little older. But we do still have the book for developing code or developing applications in a mono repo that's available. I think it's through Narwhal Connect still. So there is a book, that we wrote. Victor and I forget the other author on it, and I feel bad not giving everybody credit for their work. But I know Victor has.
And I think Nitin was the other. Yeah, Nitin was the other author on the book.
So there's a whole section in that book about how to tag and maintain library dependencies, and also how to sort of categorize your libraries. The other thing that I would call out would be Manfred Steyer has a great book on enterprise Angular applications, and it talks extensively about how to organize libraries, how to separate them, how to tag them, and how to manage those dependency constraints. His focus is very much along the domain-driven design architecture. And so he has a lot of, I mean, Manfred's just like a super smart guy, but he has really great things to say about this kind of stuff. I would really recommend reading those few books about, and they're short, 60, 70 pages each. So check those out, and I think this will go a long way towards answering, a lot of these. When do I separate out a lib, and when do I start to make those decisions?
Yeah, I think if I don't forget, I'll send the link to that book on Narwhal Connect on the YouTube show notes, and to Manfred's book also, so people can check that out.
Yes, both of which are free. Yep. As long as you don't consider like giving your email address away, payment.
There you go. So this one is an easy one. Should every Angular project use NX by default?
Wow.
That's a loaded question, and I'm going to say yes, you should. And we're going to make that process even easier, because I think you get a lot of easy wins out of. Let me take a step back. This is not a Angular CLI bashing session, but we are confident in the product that we promote. So if you have an Angular project and it's going to grow in size and scale, then either you should be using NX up front, or you should definitely look at it in the beginning of integrating NX into that project.
For sure. I thought you saved like your hot takes for Fridays, but like you're starting the week with the hot takes. That's spicy. No, I would absolutely agree. And I think it's because just NX can set you up for so much success, even within a small organization. And I think a lot of that comes from, my experience of, even if you're a small organization, that doesn't mean you're not going to do very big things. And if you sort of plan for growth right now, especially with setting up NX is, it's not completely free. It doesn't involve no time at the front of your project. It's going to add a little bit of complexity at the beginning, but I don't feel like it adds enough complexity to really like hamper you at that beginning where you're trying to get spun up. But it's going to make so many things easier down the road. Especially even if you're a small organization, you're going to want to organize things well, and NX is going to give you Again, not trying to bash the great work done by the Angular CLI team or the Angular team. I think NX gives you better tools to be able to organize any Angular project than just a vanilla Angular project. And I think regardless of your size of organization or your size of applications, I think those organizational tools are going to come in handy and help you build better, faster software.
Yep, I agree. And yes, you're right. I usually have the hot takes on Fridays, and I don't think I had one this past Friday. So I had to get one in. I had to get one in today, so it's a little delayed today.
Sure, and I mean, people could just write us off and just say, "Oh yeah, the two NX people think you should use NX everywhere." Yeah, of course we do. but also, I think we laid out some pretty good reasons for why you should use NX on just about every Angular application.
Yeah, I wouldn't, there have been other people that have said this, prior to, us saying this here now, of course, people on Twitter that I know and respect have, openly said that you should use NX on Angular projects, on React projects, on basically any new type of like web development stack.
Yeah, for sure.
You should use it just for the tooling and the things you get out of the box. So I don't think it's that hot of a take, and I'll leave the spoiler part or
Yeah.
I'll leave another part for the end. Talk when we talk later about things that are coming with NX to even make that transition easier. So
For sure. All right, what else we have in here?
let's see. Okay, we'll look at this one. It says, is it okay to move external dependencies that an app depends on to move them into the app folder? And I guess these are, so the second part is when you have a lot of apps, root package becomes very big in dependencies. So I guess this is talking about like basically the single package JSON versus each application having its own package JSON within your mama repo. And well, you go ahead and then I'll add anything if I have to.
I know that we've done like some talking about this of, yes, you get a very large root package.json and it may become necessary over time to start to break that down. But I'll also say that one of the purposes of having that one package.json, that one root file, is essentially to have one source of truth for all the external dependencies and to enforce that through your libraries. Having that one package.json is how you ensure that all of your libraries are actually running on the exact same version of the external dependency that you're working on. That's something that I feel pretty strongly about. I've gotten myself into too many different scenarios where this project depended on this thing, this version of the thing, and then this project depended on a slightly different version. And eventually one of those libraries is going to stop updating their package and the other one's going to continue, and eventually you're going to have breaking changes, and it's going to be cats and dogs trying to get those things to line back up. So you're better off just like biting the bullet, like every time you want to update that package, fix any broken code that you now have thanks to some breaking changes from that external dependency, and keep all your libraries on that same version.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because once you have separate apps on separate versions, and the minute one app becomes easier to migrate than the other one, then you can like forget it, because you got one app on version 7 and then one app on version 9 because you have some dependency that isn't being maintained anymore. And if you as opposed to, like I said, you bite the bullet up front and you remove the things that are keeping you from upgrading, and then you keep everybody along the same upgrade path, because it just mounts more the longer you go. So definitely some good questions about where your like libraries and your dependencies, and how you make sense of those things.
For sure.
Okay, and then let me check here. I didn't see any. Let me scan through real quick. I didn't see any new questions in the chat. Well, this one is a separate question. Are there any plans in the future for NX to understand what is truly affected beyond simply using projects? And it goes on to further say, let's say application library depends on say hello JS, and that Y depends on say bye, and then you modify. Today, if those things depend on each other, and you modify one, then of course both of them are going to be affected.
Right.
And it said if you only way to have it more granular is to break them out into their own projects, which is understandable. That if you need that kind of granularity. I don't know of any current plans to make affected that specific. I believe you do have more control over, and I'll bring up the NX docs here, because they do give you more control over which things you would like to check. But I think in general, the project is the way that we will check to see which libraries basically we translate library or which files were affected into the projects. And I
Hmm.
think if you need more granularity than that, then you have to structure. Everything goes back to structure. You, depending on the level of granularity you need, you have to
Hmm.
structure it that way to
Yeah.
be able to only target those certain things.
Yeah. Yeah. Ryan goes on in one of his other comments to say the only way around this is to break out say hello.js and say bye.js into their own projects.
Hmm.
Not a big deal in this small scale scenario. And I think, the other part that I would add to that is what's going to be to make sure that your developers are always doing good organization and creating libraries when they should, you need to make that process as easy as possible.
Hmm.
This line of like make the right thing to do the easy thing to do goes a
Hmm.
long way on development teams. And so there are schematics built into Narwhal into NX for generating those libraries, but there's no reason that you can't sort of expand those, because the complaints that I will often hear is, so I generated this schematic. I use that schematic to generate a library, but now, my organization has to do like X, Y, and Z to get it up to our standards or to have like our code organization. What do I do? And so you can build your own schematics on top of ours to sort
Hmm.
of flesh things out. And you might even have like a few different flavors of those, of, maybe a schematic to create a UI component library. And that sets up your whole library to use, Sass versus CSS, or organizes it in a certain way. Invest early and invest often in generating code.
Hmm.
That you're going to need to generate a lot of. Some people might call that like boilerplate
Oh, see,
generation.
see, I thought what
But
this is NX office hours. This isn't
I
NGRX office
I
hours.
know I'm sorry, but
I know. I'm totally kidding.
there's a certain amount of housekeeping you have to do
Yeah.
to get these libs. I think it's work that is worth doing.
Hmm.
Um, I like a lot of the stuff people call boilerplate in NGRX. I would also say is stuff that's worth doing.
Hmm.
Um, so I think in this case, right now the only solution is to break those pieces of code out into separate projects or separate libraries. And I think that's the right thing to do. I think you should make that process as easy as possible. And you should, set up rules for your team and for your organization so that you create those libraries ahead of time. I've definitely gotten myself into trouble before of, I'll just add like one more module to this library. It's not a
Hmm.
big deal. Like I don't want to spin up the library today. I'm just trying to like prototype this out real quick. That turns into a library that's got 10, 20 modules in it. It's got deeply nested routes. You've got like 5 levels of directories, and you're rebuilding everything all the time. So make it easy, make it fast, make the right thing to do the easy thing to do, and break these dependencies apart into separate projects. That's definitely the way to go.
Yep, I completely agree. Okay, let's see. I thought I was gonna have to go in. People talking about boilerplate, but I get it. It's okay. But yeah, like just to add on to what you said, the part about like using custom schematics is like super undervalued.
Hmm.
Just like you said, every organization is going to be different. They want to structure their files a different way. They want, or not files a different way. They want to structure their folders a certain way. Like each team
Yeah.
has to put their things under a features folder, or they group things a certain way. And like I said, NX will provide you a way to generate a library, but it doesn't care where that library goes.
Hmm.
If you're up to managing where you want consistency and like I said, you want to make it easy. So extending like the schematics that we provide out of the box, and then moving
For
those
sure.
to uh, for your proposed structure or your
Yeah.
organization structure, is a way to get both of those things, so where you can make it easy. You make it easy to do, and you're still enforcing your patterns that you want as far as organization, so that people aren't just throwing libraries over and down like 10 folders deep, or putting libraries. This is another thing, like putting libraries inside other libraries. I think that's a thing that a thing that I've seen that it's pretty easy to do. I've done it myself, and because you don't necessarily. It's easy, like I said, it's easy to do, and you don't notice it until you come back later. Like, why is this? Because then if we're looking at like the affected files, and you're like, why are both of these libraries, running, and I've only changed like the inner one. It's like, well, the graph sees both of them.
Yeah.
So that's one little rule. Don't put libraries within other libraries.
Yeah. And in terms of like building on top of other schematics, schematic creation can be a little intimidating if you've never done it before, especially when you're trying to do like really advanced stuff with like the oh man, the name is escaping me. But basically, when you're trying to like actually like modify code or like do dynamic substitution and
like
things.
The ASTs.
Yeah, there it is. That stuff is really complicated. That stuff can get really complicated really fast. But what you can do to build on top of our schematics and still make life easy for yourself without having to learn everything about schematics is you can have your schematic just, all it does is calls a existing schematic with a sort of default set of options. Especially when, there are a lot of options that go into schematics, and you may, as people are using them, they may forget to do like X, Y, or Z option in the right way. I think that the NGRX schematics actually have quite a few options on, whether you're using like action creators or like the original syntax and things like that. And you definitely want to have those things lined up across your repository. So even creating like a few schematics that do nothing except configure your NGRX state the same way every single time is going to be a big win for you. This is also the place where you can make sure that your developers are tagging things and tagging them correctly. Have a schematic that's like create a feature library, and that uses the Angular library schematic, and it also tags things with the scope of whatever you called that, a type of feature, and that's gonna. The more tags you have, the better off you're going to be. And as tagging kind of falls short if you don't actually have everything tagged and you don't have them consistently tagged. So adding that tagging into your schematic creation can be a huge win to make sure that you actually get them.
Yeah. So I think you've done more along the lines of tagging. What are your like three go-to, or what are your go-to tags when you're kind of laying things out? You mentioned the feature one, like utils and like UI or platform level. What are your kind of go-to tags when you're setting up something from scratch?
I'll say that everything I know about tagging I learned from Victor Savkin, from his book, from the book that we talked about earlier, along with his co-author that I've forgotten the name of again. That sucks to not give people credit. Nitten. Okay. And Jason Jean. Jason Jean is the project lead for the client that I'm working on right now. And so I can tell you that the things that we often, the tags that I see most often are going to be things like scope. So scope is going to allow you to sort of separate your libraries into sort of areas of responsibility. Especially if you're following something like domain-driven design, scope and domain can be very analogous. Manfred Stayer has more to say about that because he actually knows something about domain-driven design, whereas I know to just go listen to people who know about domain-driven design and tell me to.
There you go.
I will listen to anyone smarter than me, and there's a lot of people who are smarter than me. I want to emphasize that fact.
Welcome to the club.
So you've got your scope, which is going to define areas of sort of responsibility, and those are going to be, these may be separate areas of your application, or things like that. The other thing that you're very, very often going to run into is a type. And so, the few sort of standard types of libraries we have would be a feature library. Your feature library are going to be typically going to be things that include components that you might refer to as containers or smart components. And so those are going to be things that are consuming other services to get data that they'll then pump into what we might call UI components, presentational components, or dumb components. It wouldn't be software engineering if we didn't have 3 names for the exact same thing, right?
There you go.
So that's sort of a feature library, and it's going to have actual functionality inside of it. You'll then have like a data access type library, and that's going to be things that actually interface with your server. This may also be where you store some amount of state, if that's the state that you want to have shared.
That's where all the boilerplate goes.
That's where all the boilerplate goes. You write all your boilerplate and you stick it in a data access library, and then you never look at it again. So that's where your service is. That's where some of your state is. There's also a case to be made for just having a state module, and that state module is responsible for handling a very specific data entity that's on your server. The last few would be like a UI type, and that's going to have, this is very often used for like shared components. Just about every application is going to have some amount of shared components, your buttons, lists, things that you're using to make consistent style choices across the platform. And then finally, there's a util, which is short for utility. It's often full of functions that are you just use in a few different places. Pipes. Utility often gets turned into like a dumping ground, so I can't say that I recommend using it all that often. But there are certain times where it's just like, I need something to put in. I need a place to put this where people can share it. It's not a UI component. It's not a service. Yeah. It's just this bare function. That's a good place to put stuff like that.
So you heard it here. Philip said, "Don't let your libraries turn into a dumping ground."
Yes. Anyone who worked with me in the past can say that I was a little too lenient on where code lived, and they may or may not have had multiple dumping grounds for. I know if I put it here, Philip can't say anything because he didn't say anything last time either, because he would have to admit he was wrong. Yeah. But now I don't work for that company anymore. There's no consequences. I was wrong, everyone. I'm sorry. You should put everything in the views folder.
So enjoy the rest of your time there.
I've often referred to like changing jobs as like technical debt bankruptcy. It's just like you declare, I'm never going to pay it off. I'm just leaving.
There you go.
Sorry, everyone.
I've tweeted about this multiple times. You leave that old job. I think I mentioned it in a talk too. You leave that old job. You wipe your hands. Like, well, sorry, guys. It's been fun, folks. I'll see you later from the outside.
I'll check your release notes for like the next few months, and if it mentions anything like minor fixes, I'll know you did a little bit of refactoring there, didn't you?
Yeah.
Hopefully. All right.
So there's another folder structure question. People love folders, man.
I love folders.
Wouldn't you be concerned about your nested folder structure? How your nested folder structure could be using this approach?
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, this is depending on organization, but in general, we do recommend that you keep things relatively flat. Don't put things 5-10 levels deep. To even if you have a lot of libraries, they shouldn't. I guess I don't know what the exact rule of thumb is, but in general, I would say if you're more than 2 or 3 folders deep, then you probably have too many folders, because at that point you're just making it harder for developers to find things, right? And those are things that just like trip developers up all day long that they don't like to do. So
Yeah. Yeah, if I can't just like pop open like the few like top level directories that look interesting to me to try and find what I'm looking for, then I'm never going to find them. I'm never. It's like going to the third page of Google results. You're not going to do it.
If you've gotten that far, then chances are it's a failed search. Like if you don't find it within the first couple of pages, then that means that nobody's done it yet, or they at least haven't talked about it openly. So
the only time I go to the third page of Google results is if I'm looking for my name and I just want to see what's out there.
Oh, come on.
It's the same thing. You will only dig through that nested folder structure if you know what's at the bottom of it. It completely ruins your discoverability. And I want to say that in the like the Angular style guide, they recommend something very, very similar. You know, you should what is it? Lift?
Yes, it's the lift principle. John Papa is very, or has been vocal about that for a long time. I'll see if I can bring it up here. Because it's one of my go-tos also when to show people like what whenever I talk about, well, let me get this out the way. I don't like talking about folders. I don't talk about like doing stuff. So if I can point to something that'll give you some direction as far as organization goes, and lift is like one of those principles that you can easily like lean on, then I would do that, because the principles are solid and they have stood the test of time so far. So yeah, check out the Angular style guide and see if I can make that a little bit bigger. And the lift is locate code quickly, identify the code at a glance, keep the flattest structure you can, and try to be dry. So yeah, those is good rules to follow by there.
Yep. Yeah, try to be dry is one of those things that can get you in trouble. So I would also recommend people look into, there's a couple of blog posts and presentations about AHA programming. And I think there's also like damp programming, as it's like, I forget it.
It sounds like something Ken Wheeler came up with. I don't know if everybody knows who Ken Wheeler is, but
yeah. But yeah, I'm looking to those, and but the other thing I would throw onto this is, just because you're creating a lot of libraries doesn't mean that you're ending up with a lot of nested folders. You know, on just about every you know, most NX projects that I've worked on, you know, I would say within the libs directory, maybe two levels of hierarchy, where you'll have like libs, and then inside of that you'll have grouping folders, because you don't want to have like a libs directory that's completely flat. That would be wild, to have that many libraries just like sitting in a single directory. You do want to have like
some apps. No.
You're going to crush VS Code if you have that many directories in one. So, you know, a level of hierarchy under that. And typically we would group those by like scope, because that's a really easy way to group things together by code that's going to be related to one another, because they're going to be all part of the same set of features that you're sort of developing out. And then from there, you know, you really... that's going to get you most of the way, it is what I would say. You know, from there, you're probably going to have some feature folders. And I would recommend, you know, if you have a feature folder that's getting particularly gnarly, you know, maybe it does have a lot of routes in it, that might be the time to break it out into another library. You know, maybe you can lazy load another library if you have a lot of nested routes. But, you know, maybe that's my rule of thumb, is like maybe if a library gets so big that you think you should add a nested directory, maybe you should create another library and actually import things from that and break it apart, because you're probably generating, you know, you're probably doing too much within that single library.
If the saying goes, if you think you need one library, then you probably need three. No.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think even getting back to like pointing at what other folks have done, another part of that lift principle. I'm trying to find it. So, John Papa says, so when a folder has 10 or more files, it may be time to create subfolders. I would say, maybe start thinking about creating another library at that
Mhm.
point. But that's what you have to start thinking about, and we can't tell you, exactly when, why, or how it's time to create a new library. But you do start to develop sort of rules of thumb and sort of an intuition for this sort of stuff of, nah, this is too big for a single library. It's time to break it up.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we'll go back on the NX page here because we've got a few minutes left. We got some couple at least new things coming up in the next release for those people who are staying up to date as you should. You got anything specifically about the next release you want to throw in there or talk about?
I have nothing going on in here. I always get excited to hear the NX release notes because I get to see what everybody else is working on.
Okay. Yeah, for the next release, another couple of things, and we've kind of talked about this before, and we're hoping to land this coming up soon, but support for Gatsby, I know, is a thing that we've talked about, having an NX that we're working on. And this was Gatsby support is a really big thing we've been working on. Another thing is that I mentioned earlier that I wasn't going to spoil until now is about using the Angular CLI with NX. And we're working on making that process even simpler to where you can keep your existing folder structure, as far as if you just have a single project and you have a source and a lib or a source folder with your application under there, you can bring in NX without having to move everything in the applications and libraries up front. And then you can gradually, if you want to keep that structure, you can, and then gradually move towards the a traditional NX workspace structure.
Yeah.
So definitely makes that transition easier. And also, of course, I guess we hadn't talked about it much here, but like NX Cloud, we're making that connection like super simple to do, where you can go straight there, and like we'll have some more of these things in the blog post, but making a connection to NX Cloud, which makes your things in CI faster, and even locally. So we're making that we're reducing the amount of friction to get you there to NX, get you connected to NX Cloud. So definitely be on the lookout for that.
For sure. Yeah. We build tools for NX because we need them a lot of times. And so like NX Cloud is something that is, in use on a ton of client projects within Narwhal. And I can say that like for the client that I'm working with, it's like I wouldn't get anything done if we didn't have NX, or at least I'd have like one shot at a PR getting merged every day. Like if CI would if CI passes the first time, that's the only time I would get something merged the same day that it was submitted, because it saves so much time, especially when you're talking about like really long running end-to-end and especially your end-to-end tests. Those are going to be the things that run the longest. So end-to-end tests, unit tests, things like that. It saves you an incredible amount of time. And we're not just saying that to try and sell you something. We're saying that because we use it on a daily basis, and it saves us so much time. It's wild. I want to say that
those pain points that we have or that we have and solve are fixed and extended to you, in an open source project. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think we have, is there a free tier for NX Cloud now? Like everybody gets 25 free hours a month?
Yeah, well, I think it's 5 free hours. So you're giving away 25 hours?
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Jeff, thanks for I'm so sorry. I apologize. I overstated, and now we have to give.
It's only for the people that have signed up within the last minute of this, program. 25 free hours. The rest of you only get 5.
Okay.
5 hours. So
So I mean, with the new tools we're developing, you can register for NX Cloud and like get it hooked up in like 10 minutes. You can save 10 minutes of effort to save yourself at least 5 free hours a month.
Yeah.
Might be worth it. Check it out. It's really, really cool. It's a game changer.
Yeah. Cool. So I think we'll leave it on that note. And like I said, any questions that we didn't get a chance to this time, we'll definitely capture those, and we'll add the notes for the Narwhal Connect, or the book on Narwhal Connect, to the show notes, and Manfred Stayer's book on domain-driven design. I believe that's what it is. Yep. And he's, like I said, he's a big proponent of NX also. So definitely check those two things out.
For sure.
And until then, we'll see y'all next time.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.